Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at the next phase in the offensive to retake Iraq's second city, Mosul, doing so in the company of Sarah Daniel, senior correspondent for the French news weekly magazine L'Obs, formerly the Nouvel Observateur, and who's just back from Iraq, reporting most notably on minorities and how they've been impacted and will be impacted once the dust settles there. Also joining us from New York, Borzou Dargahi, Middle East correspondent for BuzzFeed News, who recently reported from Anbar province. Iraqi academic Abbas Kadim is with us from Alexandria, Virginia. He's president of the Institute of Shia Studies. And from Erbil, the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan, Shivan Fazil, fellow at the East-West Center. In part one of our discussion, we were looking at the pitfalls that await when it comes to the retaking of Iraq's second city. One man who knows that well is a familiar face to Iraqis, the new U.S. Secretary of Defense, the former commander of the 1st Marine Division in Iraq, General James Mattis. Now, his deep understanding of the terrain means that he's up to the task of, first of all, fence mending over remarks and policies by his new boss. Sam Chantier has more.
It's wheels down in Iraq for the new U.S. Defense Secretary. James Mattis arrived on Monday with a message to the country's officials on what could be dubbed a damage control mission. It's the second time in a week where Mattis has found himself reassuring a nervous ally.
I think all of us here in this room, all of us in America, have generally paid for our gas and oil all along, and I'm sure that we'll continue to do so in the future. We're not in Iraq to seize anybody's oil.
The reassurance comes after yet another contentious statement from President Donald Trump.
I don't want to go into Iraq, but I will tell you, when we were in, we got out wrong. And I always said, in addition to that, keep the oil. Now, I said it for economic reasons. But if you think about it, Mike, if we kept the oil, you probably wouldn't have ISIS, because that's where they made their money in the first place. So we should have kept the oil.
Critics have said that taking the country's oil would have been stealing from civilians, a violation of international law. During his trip, Mattis also discussed the controversial travel ban, which targeted 7 Muslim-majority nations, Iraq amongst them. Though currently on hold by a U.S. court, Baghdad promptly approved a reciprocity measure at the time, banning U.S. citizens from entering the country. Mattis has confirmed, if renewed, the ban would not affect Iraqis who have fought alongside U.S. forces. This tit-for-tat move comes at a time when the U.S.-backed coalition continues to fight the Islamic State group in Iraq, alongside a government offensive to retake the western half of Mosul, the largest and last remaining bastion of their power in the country.
The Iraqi army continues to surge against the enemy on the west side of Mosul. Despite the casualties they've taken, this is an army that's learned to fight in the middle of a real tough battle against our common enemy.
Today, some 5,000 U.S. troops are helping with training, strategy, and even targeting in Iraq.
Borzou Dargahi, when we hear those mixed signals, and we're hearing them here in Europe with the visit of the U.S. Vice President, Mike Pence, right now, is it just, a lot of sound and fury, or is there a leadership problem in Washington when it comes to Iraq?
I mean, that's a really tough question to answer, to get optics on. But I will say that the strategy that the U.S. and Iraq and other coalition partners are pursuing right now was one that was, carefully refined and developed over months after the disaster that befell Mosul and the rest of Iraq in 2014. And, I think I've said this on this show with you before. It is the strategy. If you look at what happened in Iraq and the collapse of the security forces and so on, the way that they're going forward right now is probably the least bad of many bad options. And they're pursuing it. They're winning slowly but surely. They're trying to minimize the coalition as well as civilian casualties. They're using airstrikes, rather judiciously. They're not carpet bombing parts of Mosul or any other part of Iraq. So you know, this slow incremental approach might be frustrating for some people. It might have elicited criticism on the part of some Iraqis and some Americans, but there's really no other way of going forward at this point. And you know, as far as the issues of the noise coming out of Washington, in speaking with Iraqis, I think that you know Iraqis have a rather sophisticated understanding of how the West works. Even ordinary people were saying to me when I was talking to them, yes, we hear Trump's remarks, yes, we heard about the travel ban, but we also saw the protests and we also saw the courts. So, you know, we understand this kind of strife as well within a political system.
Shivan Fazil, where you are in Erbil, is that the sense that, well, this is just politics?
I mean, to be honest, during the times of the elections, I was in the United States, and it was a very good opportunity to be following the debates and how the U.S. is going to shift its policy in the coming 4 years in the Middle East. I think I would agree with my colleague that there was not so much options and choices when it comes to how to engage in Iraq when it comes to fighting ISIL. But I think there would be more alternatives when it comes to what's going to happen in Iraq after ISIL, because there is where we could see the U.S. leadership and U.S.'s cutting-edge engagement in the country. I think this administration in the United States doesn't have appetite for nation building, and it's very unfortunate because you can do a lot of crisis management as many times as you would want to, but I don't think Iraq is going to be self-sufficient or sustainable with crisis management, or the kind of approach that we would see from an administration that is not up for the task, that requires a lot of engagement, or maybe a sustained and continuous engagement that goes beyond a military approach in Iraq. I think it requires nation building, but also for the United States to push all the Iraqi components to compromise on a new power sharing agreement, and also to decide if they want to really turn a new page for stabilization in the post-conflict, but also to start a new page or to lead for reconciliation. But that is requiring a lot of engagement from the United States. I don't think the Iraqi components will come together very easily and agree on those terms.
Sarah and Daniel, do you agree that the U.S. presence is needed, that Iraq needs more nation building, that the U.S. should play a part in it?
Yes, first of all, I think it's pretty hilarious to see General Mattis doing all this damage control going. You know, I was in Munich this weekend, and he had to say again and again that the Trump's declaration were to be taken, you know, cautiously.
And how did it go over at that security conference?
Well, you know,
Did he win over the room?
Not really, but he reassured the room, which needed badly to be reassured. And there was a sense really of, you know, terror among all those diplomats. But the real question about the new U.S. strategies, I think, is there going to be a surge in Iraq of U.S. soldiers? And I think it would be a great mistake. Of course,
there should not be.
No, there should not be. I think Mosul should be taken by Iraqis if we are, you know, keen and willing to have an after Mosul recovery going well.
Because we heard the senior commander of the U.S. forces in Iraq this Monday suggesting that there probably would be more troops and that the U.S. would stay on past the liberation of Mosul.
Well, you know, if it's just guidance and a surge in special forces, I think it's inevitable and it's wise. But to see really troops on the ground will alienate a lot of people, Sunni, Shias. I think pretty everybody has a strong sense of anti-Americanism, although, of course, Prime Minister Abadi needs the Americans to have some guidance.
Abbas Kadhim, let me ask your thoughts on this. How much presence is required, and how much presence will we see from the United States?
The Iraqis have done all of the heavy lifting on the ground fight, and they have made sure all along that they do not need ground forces to fight. They would fight their own fight, whether these forces from internationally, from far away, or regionally. And quite frankly, they've done very well. But we should not lose sight of the vital and essential role of the international support led by the United States, air coverage, even though a lot of the air work is done also by Iraqis. All of the helicopter work is done by Iraqis, but definitely U.S. Air Force and coalition work is vital, is important. It is making a difference in the fight. And also the training and the advice that the United States has given to the Iraqis, the number of troops that was mentioned earlier is essential, and it's invaluable. There is also we have to remember that what makes the difference between Iraq and Syria in fighting the ISIS.
But do you agree with do you agree with Shivan Fazil?
Support.
Abbas, do you agree with Shivan Fazil that Iraq has fragile institutions and it needs the United States' presence after the fighting is over?
Well, yeah, that's a different question, though. It's the Iraq needs a partnership. That's always what I call in all of my appearances anywhere in media and elsewhere, is that the best way for Iraq to make an alliance that is durable, that is sustainable, to serve its own national security and place in the world, is to make a very strong alliance with the United States. And also, it is the interest of the United States to strengthen its relation with Iraq. The two countries have a very important agreement that does not involve security, but other aspects: education, technology, economics, etc. And that's important. The U.S. Morally and also as far as its interests go is responsible for making Iraq a viable state and prevent it from disintegrating.
All right, let me ask Borzu about this.
A failed state.
Let me ask Borzu Dargahi about this. You just heard Abbas Kadhim saying, the United States has a moral obligation to Iraq after the 2003 invasion, whereas we heard in that report Donald Trump saying, well, Iraq should pay us to help them, really.
Well, I think that some of Trump's remarks, I think you'll see the effect of it now. For example, his remark about we're going to take their oil, we should have taken their oil, is going to really hamstring the military if they did want to make a surge now. Do you know how suspiciously that would be viewed at this point by ordinary Iraqis on the street? So, that's one really crucial thing that, the presidents need to watch their words because they could harm their own policymakers. And, in addition, at this point, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is, I think, the largest U.S. diplomatic mission on the planet. So there's already a lot of U.S. personnel in Baghdad. They have always played sort of a kind of hand-holding role with some of the Iraqi political parties, trying to provide advice on institution and democracy building and so on. Is the Trump White House, given what it has said about democracy, freedom of the press, and so on, is it in any position at this point to dole out advice on these crucial issues for Iraqis? These are really big questions. This is a government right now that's like actively supporting far-right candidates in Europe and so on, who are rather anti-democratic, borderline neo-Nazi in some cases. Is this a government that's going to be taken seriously when it says, oh, you guys should be more respectful of minority rights, democratic rights, freedom of the press, and so on?
So that's going to impact already, you're saying, Iraqi politics, but also just how isolationist is the United States? Because we're a little confused. We're hearing mixed signals from not just Donald Trump, but from across the political aisle over just how much the U.S. should play a role right now.
Yeah, this is something that is going to be an issue. You have different components in the administration making very radically different signals about what role the U.S. should be playing in the future. So, this is a big question. It's a big question mark. As, Sarah Danielle was mentioning in Munich, there was a lot of confusion and worry and angst about the U.S. People are worried about the U.S. So in that context, it's going to be a tough sell for the U.S. to go around giving advice on democracy to any other country. Maybe the U.S. should be very worried about its own democracy at this point.
Shivan Fazil, your reaction to the fact that we've seen such sharp rhetoric directed against Iran. But here, when we're talking about the retaking of Mosul, well, Tehran and Washington are on the same page.
I think they have both strategic interests in Iraq. A stable Iraq goes in the interests of Iran as well. Iran's influence in the country and its interests, given its huge interest it has in Iraq, is not something oblivious to us all. I think what Iran and the US should push for, if they are aligned in their interest in having a stable Iraq, is actually to devise their policymakers to propose or to actually help all the Iraqi components to equally push forward for new power sharing agreements for a better mechanism that would suit all components of Iraqis rather than Iran, for example, engaging in one part of Iraqi components and the United States going for putting together leadership for the Sunnis. I think they need to put their policy mechanisms together if they really want to have a stable Iraq together.
Sarah Daniel, is that possible?
Well, it's a tough question, but I just want to emphasize the fact that the end of the siege of Mosul and the liberation of Mosul doesn't mean the end of Daesh, and especially in the area, in the region, and they will have to. We have to consult the Sunni tribes and leaders, and even the one who were at some point, because of the exactions and who were supporting them, and a lot of the Sunni leaders and politicians stress that fact, and it's not been done. I mean, you cannot win a war only with power, military power and aircraft, and you have to think about the political after Mosul.
You have to think about the political, about what comes after. Borzou Dargahi, we're not getting many statements from the United States regarding the situation in Syria. And as Sarah Daniel is mentioning, it won't be the end of ISIS. It's all part of one big puzzle, isn't it? After all, the headquarters of ISIS are not in Iraq, but in Syria.
Yeah, I think there's confusion in the Trump administration about what stance they're going to take on Syria, whether they're going to continue the ongoing strategy of supporting the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is a Kurdish-led force against ISIS in Raqqa. Meanwhile, they're supporting also the Turkish-backed rebels as they fight against ISIS near Al-Bab. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has made signals that it wants to partner with Russia in fighting against jihadi groups in Syria. And that would mean, by implication, a partnership with the regime of Bashar al-Assad and partnership with the regime of Iran, which the Trump administration says that is, one of its top priorities is combating the influence and strength of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So there's a lot of contradictory policy pushes going on. If you look at the people inside the administration around Trump, some of them are, very pro-Russia. Some of them are very anti-Iran. Those things are not really compatible at this point. So it's a waiting game to see what exactly they're going to do about Syria. And yes, there have not been a lot of statements about Syria, not a lot of statements about human rights violations in Syria. When hospitals are bombed, the Trump administration has not said anything. On the other hand, the Trump administration has not held a State Department press conference since it was inaugurated. And that's rather unprecedented as well.
Unprecedented as well. Before we go, let me ask you, Sarah Daniel, you reported on minorities being flushed out of Mosul, and I just want to bring us back to that before we leave, because this is a city that's a real mosaic. It's not one ethnic group or one religion alone in Mosul. You can't find a more diverse city.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody knows about the ordeal of the Yazidi, but we have also to keep in mind the Christians and the way they were pushed out, and the fact that they might be really the great losers of this battle, because no one is going to really fight for them except themselves and their tiny force. And so, yeah, we have to be very careful about those Christians and try to help them.
If I may add something.
Yes, sure.
Please, go ahead.
I would be very interested to add something on these lines. Actually, I think given having the several military components on the ground, given that they have different objectives in the fight against ISIL, I agree with my colleague particularly that the minorities are also yet another time victims in the liberation of Mosul, as I see on the ground that the Yazidis have joined different military components. I see Yazidis being part of the Yabasha or the PYD forces in Sinjar, but also being part of the popular mobilization forces that is created for the Yazidis specifically, backed by Iraqi government. The same thing goes for the Shabaks, that the Shabak Sunnis have joined different forces within the popular mobilization units, and the Shias joined different units of the PMUs for the same battle. The same thing goes for the other minority groups in Nineveh Plains and in Mosul. I think they have been further fragmented and polarized. That is actually affecting their political future to have any say in the post-ISIL situation in Nineveh.
All right, so a better idea to integrate armies. Shivan Fazil, I want to thank you for joining us from Erbil. I want to thank Abbas Kadim in Washington, Borzu Dargahi in New York, Saha Daniel. Stay with us. It's time for Media Watch.
Thank you.
Hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois.
We're talking about the mixed signals. Borzu Dargahi mentioning there hasn't been a State Department briefing to the press since the inauguration of Donald Trump, but also the mixed messages we're getting out of Washington.
That's right. And just to start, kind of a segue from your debate topic, Francois, into, I suppose, the buzz du jour, is the fact that Defense Secretary Mattis has somewhat broken with Donald Trump, if you like, on declaring the media as an enemy of the American people. He was speaking on Sunday, and he said, the press is a constituency, and as far as I'm concerned, that we deal with, and I don't have any issues with the press myself. So he is tending to steer clear of the fake news discourse that Donald Trump, we're hearing a lot of from Donald Trump. In any case, the incident that is grabbing most headlines at the moment is a reference made by Donald Trump in Florida to an incident in Sweden last night. Now, this is 2 nights ago at this point. It left a lot of people scratching their heads, Francois, because there was no specific incident of any note in Sweden. And it left Donald Trump in an awkward position where he had to clarify his statement. Now, he was talking about rising crime in general in Europe linked to immigration. He was making a link to immigration. But he referred to an incident. So
I guess the incident was him watching cable television news.
That's right. Apparently what happened was he was looking at a report on Fox News and somehow kind of that got conflated into an incident, which left a lot of people sort of scratching their heads. In any case, I'll show you the buzz that was just completely massive surrounding all of this. What happened in Sweden on Friday night? Did they catch the Bowling Green massacre perpetrators? Now, that's a reference to another incident that didn't, strictly speaking, happen. It was an incident referenced by Donald Trump's advisor, Kellyanne Conway, when she referred to a Bowling Green, which is a place, massacre, which never happened. So you can see here this tweet is full of things that just didn't really happen. Carl Bildt, former Swedish Prime Minister, he tweeted his confusion and wondered if Donald Trump had not been engaging in some illegal smoking of something. The Swedish embassy in the US also I think this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, saying we look forward to informing the US administration about Swedish immigration.
It looks serious to me.
Well, they got a lot of people were asking them questions, and a lot of people were also tweeting directly to the Swedish embassy saying, "Look, this is not representative of the American people." Hashtag alternative facts. So this sort of went on. Then the Swedish word du jour was "källkritik," which means fact check. So that got a certain amount of viral tendency as well. Now this one requires a little bit of unpacking. J.K. Rowling, not known for being unprovocative when it comes to her Twitter presence. There was an incident apparently in Sweden last night. And the incident that was most newsworthy, it was a horse called Biscuit. I'm not sure if that's Biscuit in Swedish, or actually
Okay.
biscuit. But this horse was rescued from a well. So J.K. Rowling wanted to reimagine a slogan that would sort of sum that up. So make biscuit dry again, because biscuit, one can imagine, got a bit wet in the well. So anyway, a little bit lower stakes than Make America Great Again, I suppose, but that's what she was going for. Then every Swedish cliche on
dear.
the face of the earth got dragged up and put out there. That's an IKEA border wall. I'm wondering what that could refer to. You have ABBA and the fact that Sweden, because of this incident last night in Sweden, had to deploy their elite force of super troopers. But I think ABBA have disbanded, so I don't know if they would have been able to do that. Then you have Swedes, which are a little bit like turnips, and the terrorist group IKEA, and we can confirm here in France 24 that IKEA is not a terrorist group, claimed responsibility.
Oh dear, they even put a Volvo
They
in
even put a
there.
Volvo in. You see, as I said, it's just a mountain of cliches. This one, I mean, the hackneyed "je suis" meme, of course, has tragic origins, but here it is somewhat humorous. Je suis whatever happened in Sweden last night. So it as I say, it left people scratching their heads, and even this is the famous Twitter account of Guillaume Tessé, who merges different faces and blends them. And here
I see.
You have Mr. Bean. So I think the implication being that he does tend to come out with things that are somewhat unfactual on occasion,
And which get our attention.
and then he criticises fake news. It's
All right.
a head scratcher.
Many thanks, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.